here on the north coast of British Columbia, standing alongside the Skeena River estuary. This region is facing some of the largest proposed developments in North America. And this week we'll be talking with people who are taking a groundbreaking new approach to how we look at the potential impacts. So rather than looking at one project by one project by one project, they're going to look at the cumulative effects of how all these projects may have an impact on both the ecosystem and the people who live here.
So Kitsim-Kalem's territory goes from terrace all along the Skeena over to the coast. It used to always be just forestry and fisheries and maybe some tourism. People would come and fish on the Skeena. And all of a sudden, from all directions, we are being inundated by pipelines to feed liquefied natural gas plants. With that, all of a sudden came other things as well, like a refinery somebody's talking about, huge mega projects in wind power.
As we've got at this point 5 facility projects and 2 major pipelines coming into that area. And even if just one project goes through, we are talking 6,000 people to come into a very small area, to construction over 5 years for a facility, different workers, sets of workers, another, 3,000 or so for pipelines, 6 for a facility, and that's just one. There's 5 proposed out on the coast in Rupert. There's another 3 in Kitimat at this point. It's that scale. And people just need to are trying to wrap their head around that scale of things.
Right now, there's no holistic approach to anything really, be it socioeconomic or environmental. Nothing is looked at as a package, a holistic package. So cumulative effects, I think, is a tool to come up with how does this system get impacted and how can we measure it? And how can we make sure that we know going into a new project what is going to happen cumulatively?
There's all the other factors to consider. We've sort of focused just on the projects and their effects, but the other things in cumulative effects, there's those things that are extraneous, like climate change, which is it's a big one. And it can't be sort of left out either.
It's all a steep learning curve. What we're finding is not only are we completely inundated and unprepared for the onslaught of projects, we find that the federal and the provincial government are unprepared. They did not organize themselves in a way that they could address mega situations like this. How can we all get together and talk about these things, look at all the environmental issues we need to talk about, the economic issues, the social issues.
So some of the initiatives that we've been participating in include the federal one we're talking about. It's called Cumulative Effects Monitoring Initiative. It's being led by Environment Canada and Climate Change. We pulled together some of the federal family, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Natural Resource Canada, and then at this point it's been not limited but included the Tsimshian nations. So those out that have interest on the coast, that's Kisles First Nation, Kitsim-Kalem First Nation, Metlakatla, Lac Lams, and Gitga'at and Kikatla.
Basically, cumulative effects are the combined effects of past, present, and future activities on the things that people care about. And in our case, it's what the Metlakatla membership cares about. So the starting point for us was going through a process to understand the priorities of the membership, given the development context within the territory. One of the Metlakatla priorities is, we call it food, social, and ceremonial activity. We loosely define that as, hunting, fishing, gathering, social events, cooking, eating. So it's a broad spectrum of things, and trying to understand to what degree people are participating in these activities, and is that level of participation being negatively or positively affected by the development activity that we're seeing in the area. So that would have been something that sort of fits in like the cultural category, But in the case of at least Metlakatla First Nations, it has implications for health, economy, and social well-being as well. You know, Metlakatla has always taken economic development very seriously, but it's always been said never at the expense of stewardship. So there's all this stuff happening, and the environmental assessment process tends to be focused on a single project. It's not well suited to address the relationship amongst different projects and the effects that can result. That's where cumulative effects more steps in.
We're starting to gather the baseline data, trying to get a better picture about what state the entire zone is in terms of a holistic view. We're at one of the clam gardens in Metlakatla Pass here. It's about 2 feet, the wall is about 2 feet under the water right now, but what's exposing here right now is the terrace behind it. They did testing on it, carbon dating, and this one was one that was abandoned 2,000 years ago. You know, the forest looks natural back there, but there's a village in there. So we've zoned this area as a special management area in our marine use plan, an area that we as Metlakatla people want to fully manage. As Metlakatla people, we didn't want just protection in an area, we want full stewardship and management authority out of there so we could create our own opportunities out of these areas and kind of manage them holistically and not viewing it as like a park or a conservancy, but as an active stewardship area where we're enhancing, we're revitalizing, we're educating, and we're creating opportunity for people here.
Ideally, what you want to have in place with a cumulative effects management system is that you know your tolerances ahead of time. And so when a new project comes along, is it bumping up against that tolerance, or is there lots of room within that? So limits and tolerances, and knowing that ahead of time, that's what makes it different. And then if a project comes along and starts to impact something beyond that tolerance, well, that's a whole conversation you need to have about mitigate, avoid, manage, or offset. And it's an opportunity for decision makers to get really engaged with good information.
So working with community members and working in collaboration with other nations, we've identified a long list of values. Kikatla people harvest probably close to 100 different species from the territory. So we've identified species of concern, we've identified critical habitats, we've identified cultural values, and it's a case now of creating the indicators for being able to monitor those values and the impacts on them. So wake, for example. The community members have a lot of concern about the impacts of wake from tanker traffic. Harvesters out in a small speedboat, what that means to their safety, what that means to their gear, what it means to the species on the beach, the clam beds, what it means to boats on the beach and people on the beach, what it means to the marine archaeological sites and coastal archaeological sites. So looking at the speed of the vessels and the size of the wake, the consistency of those impacts over time as the traffic increases, and how that can be managed or mitigated or stopped.
It's very easy for one project to come in and Mr. Industry to say, oh, we're not going to have an effect on the environment. We're not going to have effect on your culture. We're not going to have effect on your social values. Well, when they start having 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these projects, the additive effect, the cumulative effect of those projects, it needs to be examined, both in a short-term perspective and, more importantly, I think, in a long-term perspective. What effects are these projects as a group, as a whole? What effect are they having on our environment and our resources and our culture? First Nations want to take the lead on this. We have a plan in place to start addressing this. And we have talked to the provincial government. We have put objectives and implementable items into the MAP plan. And we're working as individuals, First Nations, we're working collectively with our neighbors to deal with LNG, to deal with marine shipping, to deal with all those issues like safety, wake, underwater noise, protected habitats, anchorages, invasive species. We're dealing with those in other arenas that include the federal government. We've had, as recently as a month ago, we've had some really good conversations with ministries, Environment Canada, Transport Canada, and promises from ministers to work with First Nations on addressing some of these issues, including continuation of the moratorium on crude oil shipment in British Columbia waters.
So this is one of our other village sites. It's one that was abandoned around the time of European contact. So it's like a recreational beach, and our graveyard is here. It's kind of sensitive in that regard. There's quite a bit of erosion on this side, so we like to come here and, you know, monitor the beach every once in a while to see if there's any artifacts or even potentially human remains, because this whole thing was a graveyard. So, you know, we've had gravestones that have eroded out of the shell midden up here. We have a couple of places in Metlakatla Pass where erosion is happening, seems like quite rapidly. And so the cultural remains is the shell midden. Most of the things we find is things like broken tools, but we also find a lot of animal and fish bones, or what it was worked for, but I'm assuming that it was lashed onto something or used to tie around there.
Jawbone of a small mammal, and then you can see that the tooth was filed down for something.
But the other thing is with these developments is that the pass, it's one of the only ways in and out of Prince Rupert Harbor. So just boat traffic alone, whether we're talking about, you know, industrial traffic or recreational traffic, it's all going to go up. So we're going to have more people here and more wake, more wash. That's just going to disturb this even more and make that erosion happen faster. You know, we'd like to kind of at least understand what's going on here before that pressure comes. But yeah, the main thing is I think vessel traffic will have the biggest effect on this.
One of the biggest one that comes out from First Nations perspective is access. Access to the resources, access to getting to their fishing spots, getting to the vegetation or marine vegetation harvesting areas, cockles, clams. You know, are we going to still be able to get to those places? This comes down to First Nations governance. You know, this is where we traditionally went. This is our spot. You know, you can't tell us, well, you could probably go next door if you like, if we're gonna, you know, this isn't the place anymore. That's not the way it works. You know, somebody else has that spot, and then we have to ask permission, and now suddenly there's a change in our status around that. So there's a lot more to it than, you know, here, go over there sort of thing. So access is probably one of the bigger ones.
So we have an LNG project that's proposed to have a trestle over an eelgrass bed where there are juvenile salmon and crab. We have another project proposed in an area where there are 50 archaeological sites. And then we'll have tankers coming through in the commercial fishing grounds where people make a living. So there are multiple potential impacts to people's experience of the territory, their ability to harvest resources, their ability to make a living. Our office has done climate change research that's already showing the sensitivity of particular species such as seaweed to climatic shifts and change, and to add other forms of impacts on top of what's already happening is of concern to people. Some of these species are very sensitive. Herring is extremely sensitive to noise. Kekala people have always managed noise impacts in herring spawn areas, and so adding tankers through the territory, you know, makes a big difference in terms of the underwater acoustics. So that's a key concern. Right now, people can go out in a small speedboat and they may not see another vessel while they're out harvesting in their territory, or they may only see the odd fishing boat. But they're going to go out in these small speedboats and, you know, be dodging tankers down Principe Channel. If the projects are approved, That changes your experience of your territory. It changes the experience of learning about harvesting from your uncle, if that's what you're doing. So those impacts could be huge on the way people experience their place in the world and their ability to actually put fishing nets across the channel, or their ability to pull their boat up on the beach and dig clams. And those are harder to measure, but we're looking for ways to do that, because those are changes to Kitkatla lifestyle and culture that are as major as the air quality concerns and the impacts on herring spawn.
These are the things that make people's lives worth living. I think that if they have access to good food and a healthy butter clam population and the ability to fish for Chinook, and their kids can go to school and have high school completion rates that are acceptable, that just makes for a good life. The main point of Cumulative Effects is to maintain the condition of things people care about in good condition. And if the arrow starts going in the wrong direction, what it's supposed to do through management regime is inflect the arrow, turn it in a different direction. So if it's going into a danger zone, we'll call it, there should be a management regime in place associated with that zone. So that's the whole point of Cumulative Effects, is trying to keep things in the good zone, the happy zone.
Some of the questions I grapple with that keep me awake at night are very basic questions. How much is too much? How much industrial development can this area take? And where is the proper places for some of this development? We have proposals in the Skeena estuary, right? And the Skeena River is a world-renowned river. It's the second largest salmon-producing river in British Columbia. It's very important to our culture, to our people, for economic reasons. And so some of the questions are why are these LNG facilities so close? Why are they located within the Skeena estuary? How much is too much? How much development can this area handle? How much is too much for our people? On the same hand, we wonder, what are the economic opportunities for our people and our younger people?
Yeah, this is a really important time, and it's an important time for everyone to be really diligent about what happens here. There's been a lot of change here and a lot of impacts over the last 150 years, but people have been able to maintain their way of life and protect their territory and protect their culture. This is a different level of threat, so it's really important to plan it well and trace out all the potential impacts. And some of them are more clear. Like, clear out the eelgrass. There are very clear ecological impacts to that loss of habitat. But what's more difficult to trace out, but equally important, is to understand how the population increase, the rise in the price of housing, increased traffic, the size of the wake down Principe Channel, what that means to how people feel about their territory, how they are able to manage the resources.
So key to us is the management of cumulative effects, and we put it right in our word, right in our title. So it's about setting up a program, not a project, a program to manage cumulative effects. So it goes on and on and on. It never stops. It just becomes part of the way resource and environmental management is done. It's a new era, and there's all these opportunities to do a better job of stewardship in the face of all the development activity that's going on.
We might not get this chance to enter into benefit agreements with companies again. So there's a large responsibility for our nation to make sure that these agreements do have long-term benefits for our people, but at the same time, do not go over the line in terms of compromising our culture, our social values, and our environment.